Did you get any sense at all that there might be something happening in Australia, anything like what's happening in the UK? I mean, Reform now out polling the Conservative Party.
Yeah, I think every country's different. Pauline Hanson is no Nigel Farage. Probably Albanese and Dutton would both want to be talking to the Teals, um, which means they're really talking to Simon Holmes à Court. I mean, the Teals pretend that they're independents.
What likelihood do you think there is, Graham, of us seeing just a clean Labor Green victory? So a Labor Green coalition government. Well, good day and welcome to this episode of The Other Side Unplugged, our random no-frills show where we bring you the updates on the major news and special interviews at irregular random times. Make sure you do subscribe on YouTube and hit the little notification bell as well, because what that will do is notify you when we post anything, because Unplugged is irregular. You don't know when we're going to post stuff, so we don't want you to miss anything. And if you do click on the subscribe button and the little bell, you'll always be notified when we post stuff. Our main show, The Other Side, continues to go out regularly every second Friday night now, fortnightly show every second Friday night at 7 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Saving Time. And you will find all of our episodes neatly organised on our YouTube channel for you. So if you ever do miss something, you can always find it. There's 3 playlists on our YouTube channel homepage. To get to the channel homepage, you just click on the little circle that says The Other Side, the logo on the screen, rather on your YouTube screen. And there are 3 playlists. Our main show, which is our fortnightly Friday night show, our Unplugged playlist, which has all of the episodes of this show, and the segment clips playlist, which has all of our shortest segments clipped from those 2 shows. So for people who like to watch in subject matter 15-minute blocks, you'll find everything on our segment clips playlist, and they are very good for sharing as well. And don't forget our website too, if you'd like to join up, sign up, and get regular emails when we post stuff. That is at othersidetv.com.au. That's othersidetv.com.au. Well, my guest on the Unplugged episode today is Graham Young, the Executive Director and founder of the Australian Institute for Progress, which is a centre-right think tank. Graham is a pollster and a political consultant, a pioneer in the use of the internet for polling in Australia. He conducts regular polls of public opinion across Australian politics. And Graham is also an occasional columnist for The Australian Financial Review, and he appears regularly on ABC Radio. In the 1990s, he was Vice President and Campaign Chairman of the Queensland Liberal Party, and he is acknowledged as an expert in political campaigning. So it's great to have Graham with us on The Other Side Unplugged. Graham, welcome.
Hi, how are you, Damien?
Very well. So we've got some interesting research that you've just conducted throughout January. Just tell us a little bit about the approach that you take. It's a little bit different to regular polling, right? Because you're doing more qualitative, which means you're looking at what people are thinking, the why, rather than the what they're going to do.
Yeah, that's right. So this is qualitative polling. I'm interested in the variety of things that people think. It's difficult to count. You're not counting something within percents like you get in a Newspoll, where they might say, well, it's 52% to the coalition and 48% to the ALP. Elections aren't won on those sorts of things. They're won on issues. And if you don't have a large percentage of people interested in a particular issue, it's not going to fly. It's, like if you think about it, it's a difference between maybe a photograph and an impressionistic painter. Things are a bit blurry, but you can still work out what's going on.
Right. Okay.
And it's actually more useful than quantitative polling. Because the quantitative polling tells you what will happen with a high degree of certainty, but it doesn't tell you why. And if you're running a campaign, your job is to change people's minds. So you need to know why they're making that decision. So you'll find that given the choice between qualitative polling and quantitative polling, just about any reputable campaign manager would say, give me the qual.
Right. Okay.
I can do something with that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you think about it, I guess all that, Newspoll and the Roy Morgan polls tell us is, what usually that they're close, but also without much insight as to why. I mean, everybody has to sort of guess, I suppose, as to why, something might be close or might not be close. We don't always get a very clear picture from them. In fact, if we just have a look now, at the last news poll, 51% for the Liberal Party, 49% for Labor. So not a lot of insights there for us, other than that's within the margin of error of a poll like this. So it's literally neck and neck is all we can really draw from that. Graham, what are the sort of insights you're seeing coming out of your polling that shine some light on what's really going on here, do you think?
Let's deal with the predictable things first. So cost of living is a big issue. And I can tell from the responses that, cost of living isn't really one issue. It's a basket of issues. The two issues in that basket which are most important are the cost of energy and the cost of housing. I can also tell you that if someone talks to you about climate change as an important issue in this election, they're undoubtedly either ALP or Greens voters or one of the independents. So that's a clear differentiator there. If they talk to you about debt, the economy running out of control, or immigration, they're almost certainly a coalition voter or a nationalist voter. If they talk about anti-Semitism and the Israel question, interestingly, that's something associated with Liberal, national and nationalist voters. So even though there's a proportion of the left that gets very excited about Palestinian issues, doesn't actually show up in the polling. They're not actually mentioning it. Most people that mention that issue are conservative.
What is it that a campaign director would take away from that then? What would they do with that information? So I know now that in terms of the issues that matter you're telling us what the issues are for coalition voters and nationalist voters. You're telling us what the issues are of concern to Green voters and to ALP voters. But if you're on one side or the other and you're trying to swing people over, do you then focus on the issues that that the other side seems to care about, or do you focus more on the issues that your side seems to care about?
You don't focus on the issues the other side care about, because they'll never give you any credit for being right on them. So Peter Dutton would be foolish to be running heavily on climate change, because no one's going to believe that he's better on that issue. And I'm using better in the scare quotes sort of sense than the ALP or the Greens, because the people that care about climate change as an issue think that renewables are the answer to everything. However, there is a group that he can get to by talking about nuclear, because there is a group of people who are concerned about climate change and who recognise that renewables are not the answer and that nuclear has to be part of the answer. So there is a constituency there on that issue that he can get to, but you've got to find the issue that they agree with you on, which is what's happened in that case. He said nuclear's got to be part of the net mix, and a certain proportion of Greens and ALP voters have said, yeah, actually, I think you're right. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to vote for him, because there's a whole range of other issues where you'd put most of your weight. So you might target stuff to those voters on nuclear to try and get them across. But where you're most likely to put most of your weight is on cost of living, because that's what people care about. And that's where the people who aren't rusted on voters are caring about things. If you think climate change is the most important issue, the greatest moral issue of our era, as Kevin Rudd said, then cost of living is just the price you've got to pay to save the planet. So you won't get those people. But there's a lot of people that they're concerned about climate change, but they're also concerned about paying the mortgage, paying the electricity bill, getting their kids a good education, having a good retirement, those sorts of things. So that's, I'd suggest, where most of the effort's going to occur in this election. However, you also on both sides have to rally the troops. So if you're a Greens, you're going to talk about climate change because that gets your strongest supporters out. Likewise with Labor, if you're on the Liberal side, nuclear will actually get a lot of your supporters out, but so too will mismanagement of the economy, immigration, and also the issue of Israel would also bring your supporters out. So you're doing two things. One is you're strengthening your base so that you've got workforce people there talking, being enthusiastic, but you're then trying to reach out beyond that to people who need to come across to you. It's a particularly difficult task for Peter Dutton this time because essentially you've got some seats which are normally Liberal seats that are held by the Greens. So two examples of that are Ryan and Brisbane in Queensland. And then you've got the Teals. And the Teals are a subset of the Liberal vote, or not the whole Teal vote, but I'd say the core Teal vote is basically they're Liberal voters who care about climate change. So the renewable energy lobby has come up with a strategy to split them off from the Liberal Party. So the Liberal Party's first preference vote falls. They get a larger percentage of the vote than the Labor Party, and Labor preferences get them into power. So when you look at the Teal seats, they're generally seats that are fairly safe Liberal.
The other side doesn't get more than $1 billion of taxpayers' money to bring you news from a centre-right perspective like the ABC does to bring you news from a left-wing perspective. In fact, we don't get a red cent from the government. We need voluntary donors and supporters like you to keep going and growing. And we hate asking for charity, so we've done a deal with what we think is the world's best VPN, virtual private network service. It'll keep you and your family truly safe without slowing down your internet speeds, and you can watch Netflix or other streaming services using your regular accounts with them as if you're viewing from any country in the world. And you can sign up for less than $3 a month and get a whopping 83% off the normal price. Just go to piavpn.com/otherside to sign up and get more info. That's piavpn.com/otherside. All right, so just with the Teals, it seems to be that the Teals are primarily, I mean, the initial idea of the Teals was that they were teal, that they were originally Liberal, they were blue with a little tinge of green, hence the teal. But in actual fact, we see that the Teals primarily vote with the Greens 80% of the time, and they're far more left-wing, I think, than voters thought in the last election when they were buying into them. That they've basically got a very left-wing group and certainly a pro-bureaucracy sort of class of, well, they're all women of a certain age who are very driven in the sort of I guess in the bureaucracy, in management, in leadership positions, driving those sorts of issues that you would expect that demographic at inner city females of 40 to 60 might be interested in. What is your take on the Teals, and what's the feeling about people who voted for them last time, particularly Liberals, that will they go back to the coalition, do you think, this time?
My independents are people who would welcome that leftward lean of the Teals. So I don't necessarily think that the people that voted Teal got something more left-wing than they thought they were going to get. I think, you have the split in the Liberal Party. It's more prominent in some states than others. New South Wales is probably the one where it's the largest between what they call moderates, who are quite left-leaning, and conservatives. And a lot of those moderates are to the left of a lot of ALP voters. And I think that's what the Teals have scooped up. For Peter Dutton to win those electorates, I think what he actually has to do is win the hearts and minds of some of the Labor voters in those electorates. Because the whole Teal thing depends on them getting enough preference support from Labor. So if Peter Dutton can speak directly to those people and pull them across to the Liberal Party, that might strand some of the Teals without that preference flow that they need to win the seats. So I suspect that's more likely the dynamic than that he'll be able to convince people who were Teal voters last time to come back. To a certain extent, they've only just made that decision to vote Teal. So 3 years later for them to give up on them, I think it might take 2 elections. But I think history suggests that there's actually a conservative working class vote that even in rich suburbs that can come across. The other thing he needs to do is win seats from the ALP. And again, it's hard to tell it from my polling, but other stuff that I've seen, it could be the case that some of the working class seats north and south and around the edges of Sydney are at risk for the ALP. And if he can win those, then he might not need to worry about the Teal seats. If you think about the Queensland election result, that's effectively what was done by David Crisafulli. He won a seat like Rockhampton, which is, I don't think ever been held by a non-Labor candidate. They won Mackay. So I think you'll find that they're competitive in some of those seats. And if they spend too much time trying to talk to Teal voters, they won't spend enough time talking to those sorts of voters, and they won't be convincing.
Right. So what's your forecast then at this point? I mean, going off the data that you've got, what you've seen, the qualitative research that you've done, looking at the Newspolls and the quantitative research that's out there, is the coalition right to be very confident at this point?
Well, I don't think they've got any grounds to be very confident. I think the safest bet at the moment would be a hung parliament, but I'm not sure who would have more seats and therefore be trying to negotiate. So Labor, I don't think, is going to get a majority in their own right, and my sample agrees with that. Even Labor voters don't think they're going to get there. So they're forecasting a hung parliament, and their desirable hung parliament would be a Labor Greens with some support from the Teals. Liberal voters are more confident. They think they'll get there, but as we've just been discussing, there's all those Teals seats they have to jump over, and they've got to win a couple of seats back from the Greens. So I think it's highly likely that Peter Dutton will fall short. So then the issue will be, what will those Teal voters do?
So it could get very messy.
Yeah, there's enough Greens and Independents there that I think it will be hard for either party to get the 76 or whatever it is seats that they need to be there in their own right, and they'll have to do a deal with someone.
Okay, so Graham, just to summarise, we're looking at a parliament, you think, where we've got a minority coalition number, we've got a minority Labor number, we're going to have Labor and the coalition both trying to get deal done to form government with the crossbenchers. Do you think, though, that that's going to be really more about doing a deal with Teals than doing a deal with Greens?
Probably Albanese and Dutton would both want to be talking to the Teals, which means they're really talking to Simon Holmes à Court. I mean, the Teals pretend that they're independents, community independents they call themselves. But I don't know whether you realise a teal is a duck. And they say when it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it is a duck. Well, it looks like a political party, it quacks like a political party, it is a political party.
Okay, so for people who don't know, research was done pretty clearly by the Australian. They put together a very good analysis of where the funding and money was coming from for the Teals, and it seems that almost every successful Teal candidate had a budget for their campaign of almost $1 million in their electorate, which is enormous. And a significant proportion of that, 700,000 in most cases, was coming from the organisation Climate 200. All of this is totally above board and legitimate and legal. No one's suggesting any wrongdoing here, but this is actually what happened. $700,000 basically was coming for each of those electorates from Climate 200, which is Simon Holmes à Court's PAC, if you like, political action group, I suppose you could call it, equivalent to an American sort of thing. But that was basically what has been funding the Teals. Now, So as you say, they really, if it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck and it walks like a duck, it's probably a duck. So we're talking about a political party here, and you're saying basically that that it'll be a negotiation with Simon Holmes at court. Really, it's going to give him an enormous amount of power if we have this hung parliament situation, which is no doubt what they want. What likelihood do you think there is, Graham, of us seeing just a clean Labor Green victory? So a Labor Green coalition government getting across the line together without having to worry about the Teals. Is that a possibility?
It's definitely a possibility. But as I said before, recent history suggests that Labor doing a deal with the Greens doesn't necessarily help them to win elections. In fact, doesn't help them to win elections. So, and Anthony Albanese has been fighting the Greens in inner city Sydney and Melbourne for quite a period of time now. So they're the enemy to him, just as much as the Liberal Party and the National Party are. So it wouldn't be an easy alliance. And I don't know whether you've noticed, but the Greens have been making some outrageous policy announcements recently. For example, they want to target the billionaires in Australia and charge them a 10% tax of their assets. And if they try and take the assets out of the country, I don't know how you take a coal mine, for example, an iron ore mine out of the country, but they want to charge them 10% of that as well. Well, at that rate of taxation, after 10 years, there'd be nothing left. And these are the people whose ingenuity and investment provide a lot of the wealth that Australia depends on. It's absolute lunacy. But they're pitching to their base that if we do this, we can fund all the free giveaways that you want. I think Anthony Albanese, even Anthony, would find it difficult to deal with a party with that kind of lunatic agenda. So I think he's probably going to want to deal with the Teals if he can.
Is there any way of avoiding this mess, do you think, based on the research that you've done?
Yeah. Either Labor can get a majority in its own right, which means it needs to hold every seat that it currently holds. Or Peter Dutton needs to pick up, I think it's 17 or 18 seats. Now, that's large, but not unprecedented. It was a similar target for David Crisafulli in the last Queensland election, out of a parliament with 93, which is much smaller than the federal parliament. So it's possible that he could do that. If he's going to do that, then he's going to have to win back both the Green seats in Brisbane, and he's going to have to take a swag of those working class Labor seats around the edges of Sydney and North and South Coast, particularly in coal mining and steel manufacturing areas. If he can do that, he can conceivably scrape through to a majority. But it's a hard ask.
To do that, in qualitative terms, is he going to have to focus on very sort of grassroots, traditional Australian values of the outer suburbs and the and in the country and regional centres, or is he and just forget about the inner city, pretty much?
Well, I think the same strategy can serve him well in the inner city as it does in the regions. I think he's got to lay down I think of it in musical terms, he's got to lay down a strong beat, and that's the cultural stuff. And I think he's done pretty well on that. He opposed the Voice eventually, and I think that was clever politics the way he did that, because he had to bring a significant, potentially dissident part of the Liberal Party with him. So he came to that gradually, but he managed that really well. That puts him in a good position. If he can talk about immigration, again, that's more a cultural issue. That's more that sort of beat. And he's been talking about anti-Semitism, which again is a cultural issue, laying down a beat.
The Other Side with Damien Coorey is Australia's best independent news commentary show, bringing you up to speed and diving deep on the issues that matter most in around an hour, with a new episode dropping every second Friday. As we enter our 5th year, we're going to be bringing you more content via our YouTube and X channels at Other Side Oz with the Other Side Unplugged. Damien will drop comments on the news whenever something important happens, and in-depth interviews with people who have real insight and value to add. More content when it matters, but only when it matters, so you don't miss a thing. Subscribe now to our YouTube channel at Other Side Oz by clicking the button and the bell below the picture frame, and follow us on X now at Other Side Oz. That's AUS at Other Side Oz. It's free. This is The Other Side.
We got a lot of reaction to the MAD laws last year. A lot of concern in the community. I don't know how quantitative that was, how many people were angry, but the qualitative depth of anger was massive. And we're now seeing this hate speech laws going through without any opposition from the Liberal national parties. They've gone along with it. These laws are censorious. So they're a problem for a lot of people as well. And I'm seeing the same sort of qualitative anger out there among Conservative voters on that issue. Who are the people in the party who are moderate, and should they be put into line? I mean, are we really sort of, running a risk of loss here if we don't get the moderates, I guess, more in line with traditional Liberal Party values, stated values of the party?
On the free speech issue, while it's very important to me, and we've done a lot of lobbying on it over the years, it wasn't something that came up in my qualitative polling. So what that says to me is that out of roughly 600 or 700 people, none of them, Conservative or otherwise, saw that as a top of mind issue. Cost of living was a top of mind issue. Immigration, the economy, climate change, they were depending where you were coming from. But the MAD laws, I could go and go back in and do a word count in the data, but it didn't come up.
It doesn't surprise me, actually, because I think that really with those laws, we're talking about something that, as I said, concerns a lot of people, concerns a minority of people on the right very deeply. The people who are concerned about liberty and freedom of expression, concerned about government overreach. But I've often felt that the average Australian in their day-to-day would happily have their freedom of speech taken away gradually, and probably like a boiling frog wouldn't notice, and aren't really going to get up in arms about that sort of thing as much as cost of living.
I think, Damien, those laws sort of got sneaked through, so most people didn't even notice. There was, when the original MAD legislation was withdrawn, but that was withdrawn and everyone thinks, okay, we've had a win, and then this happens. But there wasn't the sustained campaigning about it.
No.
It doesn't. It also doesn't give you a reason for, if you're a voter, differentiating between Dutton and Albanese, because they're both as bad as each other. So you won't make your decision on that, but you know where Albanese stood on the Voice, and you know where Dutton stood on the Voice. And if you're a Conservative voter, particularly living in a regional area, that reassures you about where Dutton's heart is. So that's the sort of the beat that you lay down, but then you've got the tune, and the tune should be, I'd suggest, mostly cost of living. And in so much as cost of living is about electricity prices, it should be about Labor's botched energy transition.
Energy is the greatest input cost.
Yeah, and in terms of housing prices, I think the easiest thing to talk about there is immigration, where we're putting a Tasmania every year, a fresh Tasmania load of people every year into the country. That's one of the pressures that's forcing houses up. And it's something the government could fix tomorrow, and it is a federal government responsibility. So if I were Peter Dutton, there's two areas that I'd be targeting in my policy during the election campaign. So you've got the reassurance underneath of, this is where I am culturally, And then you've got, I'm talking to the issues that really concern you, and here's a solution that'll work.
Anything in your polling that sort of indicated a desire among conservative or nationalistic voters to vote away from the coalition and out of frustration that, because we also see a lot of that in our, obviously this show being sort of a centre-right show, we do get a lot of feedback in that direction that, people are sick of the Liberal Party and they want a more strong libertarian or conservative voice, and they're going to vote for minor parties and give their preferences to the LNP. But in the first instance, they're going to vote for the minor parties. Was there any of that coming through? And should the Liberal National Party even be concerned about that, I suppose, given that the preferences will flow to them anyway?
Well, they should be concerned about it because they don't necessarily flow through. One of the when you look at the vote, the Greens, 85, maybe even 90% preference Labor. But when it comes to One Nation and United Australia Party and Libertarians, etc., it's not 80, 90%, it might be 60%. It seems to be hardening up over time, but it is one of the issues. So the Liberal Party shouldn't be, negligent about those voters. It should be talking to them. But they do appear to be more likely these days to come across to the Liberal Party or the National Party than they were. So it's less of a problem.
Should people who are thinking of voting for minor parties be very careful where they put their preferences, because it could be a situation now where if they fail to put their preferences in the right place, we could wind up with a terrible situation of a Labor-Green coalition government, or a Labor-Teal some sort of coalition between Labor and the Teals, or agreement between Labor and the Teals to form government, which would be a very serious outcome for the country.
Yeah, and the other sort of voting motivation you find sometimes is that people want to punish the party that they actually would favour in government. So I'm actually talking to you from London at the moment, and you had an example of that in the last British election, where people who are normally Tory voters were so disgusted at the Tory party that they voted for either Remain or Lib Dems or even Labor because they wanted the Tories to get a message. Now, I don't think that's an issue in Australia because Peter Dutton isn't in the position where he's disappointed those people. But, sometimes people get a single issue burr under their saddle and they decide to do the punishment thing. So that can actually work against them if they don't think the consequences through.
Did you get any sense at all that there might be something happening in Australia, anything like what's happening in the UK? I mean, Reform now outpolling the Conservative Party. Who would have thought, who would have dreamed that could have been possible, a few years ago?
Yeah, I think every country's different. Pauline Hanson is no Nigel Farage. I mean,
right.
They've both been reality TV stars. I think Pauline was Dancing with the Stars, wasn't she? And Nigel was on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. But Farage is more the complete politician than Pauline is. He's also a fair bit younger. Pauline's coming to the end of her road, I think, whereas he's still, I think he's either in his 50s or early 60s. So there's differences there, and the Liberal Party hasn't let their base down in a way that the Conservatives did. I mean, if I was in the UK, I would normally be a Tory voter. But how could you vote for a so-called Conservative Party that had the highest tax rates for 70 years? I mean, if you went and checked Margaret Thatcher's grave, she would have been doing pirouettes under there in fierce indignation they were just incompetent. There's no suggestion that Peter Dutton's just incompetent, and there's no suggestion really that the Labor Party's in Australia is just incompetent. So there's no mood there which would deliver a third party that sort of prominence, and they don't have the leadership, I don't think, without wanting to be rude to Pauline, who has been an extraordinarily durable third party Australian politician. She's done better than Don Chipp, for example. She's been in existence longer than the Australian Democrats ever were as a significant federal force. So, you can't take anything away from her, but she's not in a position. And I guess the other thing too is we have compulsory preferential voting, and in the UK they have first past the post. So you can do a lot more with a smaller percentage of the vote in selected geographic areas than you can here. Effectively, mostly the large parties freeze the others out because they get that preference flow.
Yeah. Okay. So a very different situation in that case. I also think that our minor parties have got a lot of work to do in terms of developing even One Nation, given how long it's been around, but also the Libertarian Party, a lot newer, a lot smaller, I guess, or similar. I don't know how big they all are now, but the point is that these minor parties aren't offering a lineup of alternative people to vote for. The Libertarians don't even have a leader and won't appoint a leader, it seems. But you can't go to the polls and say, look, we're an alternative if you don't have a lineup of people, if you don't say, here's our team, and show some depth. And that's my biggest concern with the minor conservative parties, is that we're not seeing, okay, here are all your sort of, these are the people who will be ministers in a government, and this is who the leader and the prime minister will be. If you don't take that to the people, I can't see how you can possibly win. So I don't think we've got that energy that Reform has got in the UK, right?
Yeah, well, I think our minor parties don't have the ambition to be a major party. Whereas Reform, Nigel Farage, at one stage, very close to the election, wasn't even going to run for Parliament. And then suddenly he was. But now he's in there, he seems to have decided, well, he might as well make a decent fist of it. I don't think Pauline Hanson ever saw herself as Prime Minister. I don't think Jackie Lambie ever saw herself as Prime Minister. The minor parties have their strength in the Senate. Apart from the Teals, and that's one of the significance of the Teals breakthrough, that they actually have lower house seats. Generally, minor parties in Australia federally have had upper house seats because it's easier with the proportional representation to get in there. So being in the upper house, you really don't have that path to becoming the government.
Yeah. All right, Graham, thanks very much for joining us. Really do appreciate your insights there, and I think some really great research. So thank you once again. Would you care to have place a bet on what you think the outcome is actually going to be?
I'm running quite a good surplus in my betting account on elections. And one reason for that, Damien, is I only bet on certainties. And I think I'll be keeping my money in my pocket on this one, unless something changes drastically in the next month or two.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? All right. Well, it's going to be fun. We'll get you back on before the election again to see when you do another poll, and let us know. If people want to get in touch with you, it's aip.asn.au, right? ASN being association, so it's not org or com.
Right,
it's
right. That's it.
aip.asn.au. We'll put that up on the screen. If people would like to check out the Australian Institute for Progress and what it does and its mission, and maybe join up. Graham Young, thank you very, very much for your time. The other side doesn't get more than $1 billion of taxpayers' money to bring you news from a centre-right perspective like the ABC does to bring you news from a left-wing perspective. In fact, we don't get a red cent from the government. We need voluntary donors and supporters like you to keep going and growing. And we hate asking for charity, so we've done a deal with what we think is the world's best VPN, virtual private network service. It'll keep you and your family truly safe without slowing down your internet speeds, and you can watch Netflix or other streaming services using your regular accounts with them as if you're viewing from any country in the world. And you can sign up for less than $3 a month and get a whopping 83% off the normal price. Just go to piavpn.com/otherside to sign up and get more info. That's piavpn.com/otherside.
The Other Side with Damien Coorey is Australia's best independent news commentary show. As we enter our 5th year, we're going to be bringing you more content via our YouTube and X channels at Other Side Oz with the Other Side Unplugged. More content when it matters, but only when it matters, so you don't miss a thing. Subscribe now to our YouTube channel at Other Side Oz by clicking the button and the bell below the picture frame, and follow us on X now at Other Side Oz. That's AUS at Other Side Oz. It's free. This is The Other Side. Stay in touch. Check out our independent website at othersidetv.com.au. You can sign up for free there too, or join the exclusive side and help support our show for less than $5 a month.